in terms of Ukraine striking legitimate military targets inside of Russia, for example, the oil refineries, they're doing an amazing job to the point where there are significant shortages being reported in the pro-Kremlin media. And we're talking about front page stuff about long lineups at gas pumps. And right now it's the harvest season. And if agricultural machinery can't fuel up to harvest the fields, that's a big, big problem. Most of the shortages are being reported in more remote regions, but don't be surprised if this continues that you're going to see shortages in St. Petersburg, in Moscow, and elsewhere.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we are joined by Michael Bociurkiw, journalist and author of the Substack World Briefing. Michael, thank you very much for joining us today.
Good to be with you again.
Well, just yesterday, Michael, there's been another Russian incursion over NATO territory after a Russian warplane overflew Estonian waters in the Baltic. Is caution necessary from NATO, or are we inviting escalation if these incursions are left essentially unchecked?
Well, there's one thing everyone needs to understand, right? Is that words don't matter when it comes to trying to push Russia back, when it's, trying to scare Vladimir Putin. Words don't scare him. And I think what's happening, in fact, I'm in New York at the UNGA, and we just had a discussion this morning about what it takes to push back the bad guys. And there's a feeling that not only is the rules-based international order in a free fall, that autocrats or bad guys or non-state actors are ignoring humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions, all of these tools that we all once depended on to have a free and fair world. A lot of that is gone. Thank God there's things like the International Court of Justice and so on. But I think over the years, NATO has become very complacent. Yes, they're going to go into Ukraine. Maybe they're going to the Baltic states, but they're never going to mess with, let's call it mainland NATO territory on the eastern flank, the Polands of the world or Germany. So it is happening. And I think basically two reasons here. One is, as you've heard me say multiple times previously, no solid red lines policed by the United States anymore. At best, they're dotted lines or they're gray lines. And the other thing, what is happening is this is Mr. Putin testing, probing how far we can do. After all, that's what autocrats do. And I think that if they're doing these incursions, especially the 3 MiG fighter jets over Estonia, this order came from up high. Probably Vladimir Putin himself signed off on it, which is very worrisome. And then the other thing is this was premeditated. This was not a scheduled, series of flights that the Russian claimed. So these are very, very dangerous times. And, triggering Article 4 consultations, now we've seen it done twice by Poland, now by Estonia. Putting more kit in the air that doesn't really match the threat. These are very troubling times indeed because of all that.
And Ukraine is now offering to train Polish soldiers to use interceptor drones. Could that kind of low-cost, low-risk way of stopping Russian drones de-escalate this threat in and of itself, or does NATO need to step up here?
Well, my friend, I'm smiling because who would have thought we would have got to the day where you have Ukrainians offering to train NATO about how to bring down Russian drones, which we must, if anyone needs any reminding, there's also technology in there from Iran and also China. But yeah, the Ukrainians have built up a huge body of knowledge, of experience. They're the most experienced fighting force we have in the modern world right now when it comes to fighting off not only the kinetic warfare, but the hybrid warfare and the tech warfare, that they are in a good position. And, they have really cool methods. They don't tell us everything, but part of it is GPS jamming. It's using electronic warfare to confuse these drones. It's also using a number of things in the air that they don't talk about much, decoy drones. The Russians are fighting back hard. They're also using all kinds of different techniques. I looked at the map the other day of the latest Russian wave of drones. I think they're about 300 to 350, and it looked like a piece of artwork when you look at the map. They use these circuitous paths to confuse the Ukrainians. But let there be no doubt is that whatever has been thrown back at the Russians so far, because of the mass of drones that are being sent over, it's very, very difficult for any fighting force, no matter how experienced, no matter how advanced, to fight them off. But again, I go back to what I said at the beginning. At the beginning of the war, yes, you did have NATO forces, including Canada, training Ukrainians, first in Western Ukraine, now outside their borders. And now it could work the other way around. I mean, I wrote the other day in World Briefing the way the Poles and NATO responded to that Russian incursion was like firing a cannon at a canoe. You know, it was really an expensive, ineffective way to fight back with these small, cheap devices. So they're going to have to learn very fast, and who better than the Ukrainians?
And as you say, you're at the UNGA today. Have we heard much out of the Russian Federation today at the UN?
Oh, Um, I haven't. If they spoke today, I haven't heard them. But I can tell you one thing: we're going to get the same old narrative from them that this is Ukraine and the West that started this war, that provoked Russia. They had no choice. They're there to protect Russian speakers. They're there to bring back the former Soviet Union. This is Mr. Putin's dream. Uh, they will deny. They will deny kidnapping thousands of Ukrainian children. They will deny hitting schools, hospitals, all kinds of civilian infrastructure. They will claim that these are legitimate military targets because Ukrainian forces or munitions are stored there. We've seen enough of this. It makes us sick to the stomach to hear this tired old narrative. I think all everyone needs to remember about all of this is look back at July 2014 when MH17 was shot down with 298 innocent civilians. The Russians lied and they were caught out. They lie and they lie and they lie. And, I'm in the United States right now. I have to be a bit careful what I say, but let's put that on the record. But they use this Kremlin-esque kind of narrative that, oh, it's they who are doing this. So they're very good at pointing the blame elsewhere, where really they're the ones that initiated this and started it. So uh, I think the Ukrainians now are in a good position to counter whatever they said. They have a new UN ambassador, a permanent representative, and they also have, by the way, a very talented and experienced diplomat, Olga Stefanishina, who's now taken over the role of Ukrainian ambassador here to the United States. So I think you're going to be hearing a little bit of a different tone coming from the Ukrainians. The only difference, just to wrap up this answer, is you're not going to see the pushback that one would expect from the U.S. delegation. They're still in this fantasy mindset that they can still lure Mr. Putin to the negotiating table with carrots rather than sticks for the most part.
Well, yeah, and on the US perspective on this, can we now consider the possibility of talks with Russia dead if they were ever alive in the first place, or should Western partners still continue trying to bring Putin to the table on talks?
It's a very good question. None of us are capable of getting into the mind of Vladimir Putin, number one. Number two is that it's been months now of various attempts by the Trump administration, by Turkey, by the Gulf states, by many others interlocutors, maybe even China in the background, to get Mr. Putin to stop carpet bombing basically Ukrainian cities, to put down the arms, to show some signs that he's interested in peace and to come to the negotiating table. The problem that has happened is the Russians have put Mr. Zelensky in an impossible position where he can, in good faith, go to Istanbul or Doha or the Vatican. He won't go to Moscow or wherever these potential talks are going to happen, and start off where they put their kind of high water mark. Is this is what we want? And we've gone through the list numerous times before on Frontline, so I don't need to repeat them. So the Ukrainians realize that they're not interested in peace, and I think I have a feeling from the signals I've been picking up here in the past few days since I've arrived that there's more of a realization, at least on Capitol Hill, that it's time for harsher measures to push Mr. Putin back and hopefully bring him to the negotiating table. And of course, that includes starving that Russian war machine. And the idea there is to make that happen through very, very tough sanctions, not only on Ukraine, but also on India, China, these countries, perhaps Brazil into the mix, that are heavy buyers of Russian oil. So there is that pending Senate bill, bipartisan, I think 85 plus sponsors. The leadership in both chambers have expressed quite a bit of support for this. It's really up to Mr. Trump to signal, okay, I'm ready for it, because I still think he's in this frame of mind where he'd rather use his own um, executive powers, whether real or invented or experimental, until the courts bring them down, to dictate foreign policy. But as we've seen, there's growing discontent in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, I think, of Mr. Trump doing a very unilateral foreign policy. For example, what he's doing in the Caribbean right now, striking suspected drug boats off of the coast of Venezuela. It's not gone over very well here. Normally, you would go through Capitol Hill to pass that kind of permission through.
And has the US done enough, if anything, on these incursions into NATO territory? I mean, is there anything that you think Trump has done in the past week that could make the Russians think twice about carrying on?
They haven't done anything that we are aware of that's visible. But having said that, I think it's very, very, very important for anybody who has any leverage whatsoever with Mr. Trump, perhaps Keir Starmer, after that successful visit to the UK, royal visit, that the United States is convinced that they have to continue the intelligence sharing with the Ukrainians. If that were to suddenly be pulled away, there's no one state or bloc that can replace that technology, those eyes in the sky, that not only warn the Ukrainians when flying objects are coming over the border, which helps people like me sleep easier because we know we can rely on those air raid sirens in Odessa, but also troop movements on the front line as well. If there's new kit coming in, things like that, that's really, really important. But once again, I think it is important for the United States to visibly show that it is doing something, because as we already spoken about, if you don't have those solid red lines that set up that wall for Mr. Putin, that going beyond a certain border is no go. One military analyst said the other day, when it came to previous kind of lines of contact or no-go zones in previous times, the Russians knew exactly the lines they had. They would not even dare come into buffer zones, let alone crossing into sovereign territory of another nation. So that's where we are right now. It's not in a very, very good position. And, the next 2 days or so, when Mr. Trump is here in New York, I know he will have many bilaterals, including with Mr. Zelensky, who is speaking on Wednesday, by the way. And I'm sure that's one of the key points Mr. Zelensky is going to, repeat to him, is that please, please, please don't hold back that intelligence sharing capability.
Yeah, and Trump is expected to speak at the UN in the coming days as well. What should we expect to hear from him, do you think?
Well, I already know what Mr. Trump is going to say because he already told us. he he gave an interview for Fox, who's one of his favorite broadcasters, depending on what day it is, and he said he's going to talk about the 7 or 8 wars he's already brought to an end. Uh, a lot of people are having issues with that count, including the Indians who say, well, wait a minute, it wasn't you who stopped the conflict we had recently with Pakistan. And also the Malaysians were involved in that too. So he seems to be taking credit for ending things that he probably shouldn't take credit for. He did say that he will be at least thinking about, I'm sure it will come up in the speech, about the war in Ukraine, about Gaza. He lumped the two of those together in basically 2 sentences and said, they're horrible things, people are dying, and we've got to do something about it, but he wasn't specific. Another thing he's expected to address, but he didn't say that in the Fox interview, is about the United Nations system. I mean, what better pulpit to address the UN than in the UNGA? And the United States has already been cutting funding quite severely to the point where a lot of organizations, including UNICEF that I used to work for, are really having to make deep, deep cuts that at the end of the day are affecting whether people eat or they don't, whether they live or they don't, whether they receive life-saving vaccines. He will call for more UN reform, and let's be honest, there's a lot of fat there that needs to be cut. For example, in WHO, they themselves recognize that. But it's really the funding issue, and it all goes back into throwing red meat to his base, saying that millions, billions, and billions have been wasted on these ineffective organizations, on these conflicts that have nothing to do with us. It's time to cut back, save the US taxpayer money. Yeah, so of course, there are a lot of other issues other than Ukraine. And of course, Gaza, recognition of Palestine as a state is a big, big one here. So now we have the United Kingdom, we have Australia, we have Canada in a coordinated announcement over the past 48 hours or days or so, saying that they're going to recognize the Palestinian state. Should be mentioned, and sorry, France is expected to come on board as well, which is a biggie. But I just need to say one thing about this because I came out of a breakfast roundtable on this and other topics this morning, and the degree of suffering in Gaza is very, very bad. For the first time, I heard a former resident of Gaza actually say, we may have to leave temporarily. I've never heard that before because the destruction, the bombing is so badly. So I'm not confident that this is going to make any sort of a difference on the ground. I did tell this UN panel this morning that Israel no longer feels the pain of isolation as if it ever did. And then also in retaliation for this recognition of Palestine as a state, number one, the Netanyahu government is saying that this is rewarding the terrorists. But number two is the hardcore right wingers in his cabinet, in his coalition, propping up his coalition, are going to say, okay, fine, you want to do that to us? We're going to take even more bites out of the West Bank. We're going to put up more walls, more fences. Settler violence is going to be even more tolerated. So it's a really, real big mess. The other thing, as I mentioned, Trump may talk about is the UN reform. But also, I think a lot of people here, I'm getting the sense are they're asking themselves, is the UN even effective anymore in terms of bringing peace to these troubled lands, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Gaza? We heard a lot this morning about Sudan and the forgotten war there. Whether it can make a difference, I'm not so sure anymore. And I am speaking to you as a former UN employee and global spokesperson for UNICEF. It doesn't make me very happy to have to say that. And then one last thing, this did come up at the previous UNGA, but keep an eye on Africa. There's, in the next quarter of a century, Africa is going to, I think, become much more assertive. It's going to do a lot more trading within African countries. It may even do things like no longer send diamonds or cocoa to Belgium or Switzerland for refining and for selling. They want to do it themselves. And the population growth there is amazing. I was told by a former African banker today that in the next quarter of a century, 1 out of every 4 people on the planet will come from Africa. So let's keep an eye on that as well.
Michael, we often hear about this almost complete stalemate in the conflict, but Ukraine is now seeing some advances in the Sumy region and is having quite a lot of success in its long-range strike capability. What do you make of where the Ukrainians are in this conflict at the moment?
Yeah, so it's very difficult to get a proper fix on what exactly is happening at the front line, because it does seem that one day the Ukrainians are taking credit for significant advances, and then the next day the Russians do exactly the same thing. But if you look at the more general trends that we've been seeing for the past few weeks, is the Russians have been devoting quite a bit of manpower, quite a bit of firepower to getting control of those very crucial elevated pieces of land, those strategic cities in the Donbass where they can make further advances, Konstantinovka, places like that, Pokrovsk. There's also talk of a bigger Russian buildup around the areas of Kharkiv and Sumy. And my goodness, they sure seem to have an endless supply of drones and also missiles. But in terms of Ukraine striking legitimate military targets inside of Russia, for example, the oil refineries, they're doing an amazing job, to the point where there are significant shortages being reported in the pro-Kremlin media. And we're talking about front page stuff about long lineups at gas pumps. And right now it's the harvest season. And if agricultural machinery can't fuel up to harvest the fields, that's a big, big problem. Most of the shortages are being reported in more remote regions, but don't be surprised if this continues, that you're going to see shortages in St. Petersburg, in Moscow, and elsewhere. The other thing the Ukrainians have not given up on is further degrading the Russians' Black Sea fleet. I think there is a development over the past couple of days where they hit quite hard there. So it's on a number of fronts. And again, this is not really that much due to Western technology or manpower. This is homegrown stuff, drones that have a lot of range and pack a lot of firepower to really hit Russia where it hurts. But most importantly, to bring this war to the doorsteps of ordinary Russians. They seem to be doing very well on that front.
Well, Michael Bociurkiw, author, journalist, and of course, author of the Substack World Briefing, thank you very much for joining us today on Frontline. You've been watching or listening to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Louis Sykes. For more on the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for a membership, or you can hear all the latest news and analysis on Times Radio or read it at thetimes.com. And remember, we are in both podcast and video form. You can find us on your favourite podcast platform. It's Times Radio's Frontline, or you can watch us on Times Radio's YouTube channel. Thanks very much. Goodbye.